The most valuable commodity in the ancient world was a dull, gray metal. Long before silk or spices traveled the famed roads, a hidden network of trade moved something far more fundamental. This is the story of early metallurgy hubs, the quiet workshops where fire and ingenuity forged the first connections between distant civilizations. By the end, you will understand how the quest for copper and tin created the blueprint for all global trade to come. Who were the forgotten smelters that powered empires, and why are their locations still some of history's greatest secrets? What does our modern world of semiconductors and supply chains owe to these ancient furnaces? That first glimmer of copper in the ashes was a quiet beginning for a deafening change. Think of the world before metal. Tools were shaped from stone, bone, and wood, materials bound by their natural forms. A breakthrough in one village might stay there, isolated, but metal was different. Its production was a recipe, a sequence of steps that could be learned and shared. From that moment of discovery, a new kind of knowledge began to travel, and it traveled along the very routes created by the hunt for raw materials. The true revolution wasn't just the copper knife, it was the network required to make it. Because while the knowledge of smelting could spread, the rocks themselves could not. Nature had placed the critical ingredients, copper ores and the far rarer tin, in concentrated pockets scattered across the landscape, often in rugged, inhospitable terrain far from the fertile river valleys where early agriculture thrived. This was the planet's original uneven distribution of resources. One community might sit atop a mountain of copper ore, their fires burning green and blue, while another, just a few valleys away, had only flint and clay. For the first time, what you had and what you needed were not found in the same place. This simple geological fact forced a new behavior, interdependence. No single village could master the metal age alone. The smelter needed ore from the miner. The toolmaker needed tin from a trader who had crossed mountains. The scarcity woven into the earth itself became the engine for connection, pulling people out of their local circles and into a web of exchange that would eventually span continents. The stage was set not by kings or conquerors, but by the silent, stubborn arrangement of rocks beneath our feet. This imbalance of resources created a new kind of place on the ancient map. We often call them mines, but that word is far too small. A true metallurgy hub was an entire world in miniature, a bustling, smoky, ingenious ecosystem dedicated to one purpose: transforming rock into power. Picture not just a hole in a hillside, but a permanent settlement clinging to a rugged landscape. The mine shaft was only the beginning. Surrounding it were managed woodlands, meticulously harvested to produce the mountains of charcoal needed to feed insatiable furnaces. There were workshops where ore was crushed and sorted, and others where clay crucibles and furnace linings were crafted. There were living quarters for the miners, the charcoal burners, and the most crucial figures of all, the master smelters. These individuals held knowledge more valuable than the metal itself. They understood the subtle art of the furnace, the precise temperatures, the right mixtures of ore and fluxing agents to draw out impurities, the telltale colors of the flame that signaled success or failure. This was not common knowledge, it was a guarded craft, a lineage of expertise passed from teacher to apprentice, often within families. The hub thrived on this combination: raw material from the earth, fuel from the forest, and irreplaceable skill from human mind. It was a factory, a laboratory, and a closed guild, all operating centuries before those concepts had names. Within these hubs, innovation was constant. A smelter might experiment by adding a different stone to the furnace mix, accidentally creating a slag that flowed more smoothly. Another might blend copper from one vein with a curious, heavy ore from another, and through trial and error stumbled upon the miracle of bronze. This was where theory met practice in a shower of sparks. The success of a hub was fragile, a constant balancing act. If the local forests were depleted, the fires died. If the skilled families left or their secrets were lost, production collapsed. And crucially, if there was no way to get the finished metal to people who needed it, the entire enterprise was pointless. So the most successful hubs naturally became nodes, anchored to the landscape by geology, but connected by invisible threads of commerce to the wider world. They were not endpoints, but powerful engines placed at the very start of a chain that would stretch for thousands of miles. The story of these early networks finds one of its clearest blueprints in the ancient highlands of Anatolia. Today we know this region as Turkey, a land of dramatic mountains and vast plateaus. Here, communities like those at Çatalhöyük were working with native copper, the pure metal that can be found in nugget form, over 9,000 years ago. They hammered it into beads and small tools, a practice that was revolutionary yet still local. But the true transformation began when people looked not at the surface but beneath it. In the formidable Taurus Mountains, they began to follow the green-stained veins of copper ore deep into the earth. This was no casual gathering. It was systematic mining requiring organization, light, ventilation, and tremendous effort. These miners were tunneling into history, extracting the very material that would build new worlds. What they produced was not just copper. Through a process likely born from experimentation, they began creating an arsenic copper alloy. This was a deliberate enhancement, a harder, more durable metal achieved by smelting copper ores that naturally contained arsenic. This technological leap meant Anatolian metal was not just abundant, it was superior. And superior goods have a way of traveling. Chemical analysis of metal artifacts tells a silent but eloquent story. By the 4th millennium before the Common Era, copper with a distinct Anatolian signature was appearing hundreds of miles to the south, in the burgeoning cities of Mesopotamia and the ports of the Levant. This was not a trickle but a sustained flow. The great Mesopotamian city-state of Uruk, with its ziggurats and early writing, did not have rich copper deposits of its own. Its growth, its ability to arm soldiers and craft tools, depended on this steady supply from the northern mountains. In exchange, Anatolia received goods and ideas, fine textiles, administrative techniques, perhaps new styles of pottery and art. This was the birth of a true economic relationship. The highland miner and the lowland scribe became connected, each dependent on the other's unique resources and skills. The Anatolian Nexus shows us that the first global systems were not built on luxury but on necessity. They were forged in mountain fires, and their trade routes became the earliest channels for everything that followed. But copper alone could only take civilization so far. The real leap forward, the leap that defined an entire age, came with a second, far more elusive ingredient. To transform soft copper into hard, resilient bronze, you needed tin, and tin was the ghost metal of the ancient world. Its ores were not just rare, they were almost magically scarce, scattered in a few isolated pockets across the entire globe. Unlike the green veins of copper, tin ore, cassiterite, is a heavy, dark, rather ordinary-looking stone. You could walk right past it and never know you were looking at the key to military power and economic dominance. This obscurity made its sources the most fiercely guarded secrets of their time, secrets worth more than gold. The hunt for this unassuming rock would draw lines across continents, connecting places that otherwise had nothing in common. Major sources slowly come into focus through the archaeological record. The Erzgebirge Mountains, the Ore Mountains between what is now Germany and the Czech Republic, were one early nexus. Far to the northwest, the rugged peninsula of Cornwall in Britain was another, its tin streams known from an astonishingly early date. And thousands of miles to the east, evidence points to ancient sources in Central Asia, possibly in the region of modern Afghanistan. These were not neighboring villages. We are talking about distances that would have seemed unimaginable. This scarcity created something entirely new, the ghost trade route. These were paths worn smooth over centuries by feet and hooves, not for moving armies or migrating peoples, but for transporting this one critical, low-volume, high-value cargo. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a semiconductor supply chain. A trader in Cornwall might sell tin to a seafaring merchant from Gaul. That merchant might sail it to a trading post in the Mediterranean, where it would be purchased by a Levantine merchant, who would then transport it overland to a major hub in Anatolia or Mesopotamia. At each handoff, the value increased, and the origin story likely grew more vague. The final smelter, working his furnace in a Hittite city, might have had no concept of a misty island at the edge of the world, yet the product of that island was in his crucible. This multi-stage, intermediary-driven network was a system of remarkable resilience. Because no single culture controlled the entire chain, the flow of tin could adapt. If conflict closed one overland route, maritime paths might expand. If a mine was exhausted, the search would intensify elsewhere. The Bronze Age world was held together by this fragile, invisible thread of gray ore, a testament to the fact that when something is essential enough, humanity will find a way to move it across the earth, one guarded step at a time. While the ghost trade for tin wove its web across Europe and Asia, an entirely separate industrial powerhouse was rising in the east. The cities of the Indus Valley civilization, flourishing between 3,300 and 1,300 years before the Common Era, achieved a level of metallurgical organization that feels startlingly modern. In places like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, archaeologists uncovered not just scattered workshops, but evidence of planned, standardized production. They found uniform copper ingots, like early versions of today's industrial bars, and meticulously crafted cubical stone weights that ensured every trader from the mountains to the coast was using the same measure. This was not cottage industry. It was a supply chain managed with bureaucratic precision centuries before the word bureaucracy existed. The scale of their ambition becomes crystal clear at a remarkable coastal site called Lothal. Today, Lothal is famous for what may be the world's earliest known engineered dockyard, a vast brick-lined basin connected by a channel to the estuary of the Sabarmati River. This was not just a harbor for fishing boats, it was a purpose-built port for ocean-going cargo, and what was one of the primary goods moving through this ancient logistics hub. Metal excavations at Lothal revealed entire city blocks dedicated to metallurgy, rows of furnaces, workshops for refining ore, and casting areas for producing tools and ornaments all point to centralized, high-volume output. The city was a factory, a warehouse, and a shipping terminal all in one, humming with the activity of turning raw copper into a tradable commodity. The reach of this Indus industry was vast. Indus-made copper artifacts with their distinct chemical fingerprint have been discovered in the ruins of Mesopotamian cities like Ur. Even more telling, Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets repeatedly mention a prosperous, distant land they called Meluha, a place known for its ships and its valuable goods including copper, carnelian beads, and exotic woods. Most scholars agree Meluha was the Indus Valley region. This creates a stunning picture, a two-way maritime trade system across the Arabian Sea. Indus ships, laden with standardized copper ingots, finely crafted bronze tools, and those famous etched carnelian beads, would sail west to the ports of Mesopotamia. In return, they brought back silver, textiles, and perhaps Mesopotamian luxuries. This exchange was so established, so routine, that it was simply part of the commercial landscape. The Indus merchants did not need to conquer or colonize. They integrated through commerce. Their quiet, systematic production in cities like Lothal quietly wove South Asia into the fabric of the first global economy. proving that economic influence could flow as powerfully as any army, carried on the hulls of ships sailing between two of the world's earliest great civilizations. Far to the north and east of the Indus, another civilization thrived in the harsh, beautiful landscapes where desert meets mountain. In the river valleys of what is now Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan, the Oxus civilization mastered a different kind of power. They were not coastal traders like Lothal, but inland specialists, living at a geographic crossroads that was both isolated and impossibly connected. Their world was defined by the Amu Darya River, known in antiquity as the Oxus, a vital artery cutting through a sea of sand and stone. Here, they built fortified centers with high walls and complex irrigation systems, creating oases of productivity in an unforgiving environment. What made them truly remarkable was their metallurgical artistry. They were not just smelters, they were the Bronze Age equivalent of master jewelers and engineers combined. While others focused on copper and tin, the Oxus workshops became famous for their sophisticated alloys and their breathtaking work in precious metals. They produced intricate ceremonial axes that were never meant for battle, their blades etched with symbolic designs, and slender vessels of silver and gold so thin they seemed to glow from within. These were objects of ritual, status, and profound cultural meaning. But how did a civilization in the heart of Central Asia acquire the raw materials for such luxury? The answer lies in their genius as intermediaries. Look at a map of the ancient world, and you see the Oxus region sitting at the literal center of a spider's web. To the south were the tin sources, possibly in the Afghan highlands and the distant cities of the Indus. To the west lay the resource-rich Iranian plateau. To the north stretched the vast Eurasian steppe, home to mobile pastoralist cultures. The Oxus people became the essential middlemen in a continental exchange system. They likely received raw copper and tin from the mountains, gold dust from Siberian rivers, and lapis lazuli from the famous mines of Badakhshan. In their workshops, these disparate materials were transformed. They refined, alloyed, and crafted them into finished goods of far greater value. A steppe chieftain to the north might trade a sack of raw metal for a magnificent Oxus-made silver cup, a symbol of authority. An Indus merchant might acquire an ornate bronze compartmented seal for stamping goods. In this way, the Oxus civilization did not merely trade goods, they facilitated conversations between worlds. A design motif from the steppes might appear on an Oxus axe, which then traveled to Iran, subtly influencing art there. Their position turned them into a cultural and technological filter, blending ideas from settled farmers and nomadic herders, from southern sculptors and northern metalworkers. They were the quiet, indispensable processors at the heart of the network, proving that in the ancient global economy, sometimes the greatest power belonged not to those who controlled the source or the final market, but to those who mastered the transformative space in between. Yet this intricate web of continental trade had a powerful, parallel system operating across the water. While the Oxus civilization thrived inland, a very different kind of power was rising from the sea, built entirely on the ability to move metal. The vibrant, palatial cultures of the Aegean, first the Minoans of Crete, and later the Mycenaeans of mainland Greece, did not possess the resource wealth of Anatolia or the Indus. Their grandeur was founded on a simple, precarious reality. Almost all the copper and tin needed for their bronze had to arrive by ship. This was an economy perpetually one storm or one pirate raid away from collapse, and that constant pressure forged them into the Mediterranean's first great maritime superpowers. The Minoans, with their sprawling palace complexes at Knossos and Phaistos, were not just artists and administrators, they were master logisticians. Their famous frescoes depict sleek, oared vessels, and some of the most telling images show these ships carrying distinctive oxhide-shaped copper ingots. These were not generic trade goods, they were the standardized currency of Bronze Age bulk metal transport, designed for easy stacking in a ship's hold. The ingots themselves tell a story of a managed supply chain. Chemical analysis reveals that the vast majority of this copper came from a single, prolific source, the island of Cyprus, whose very name derives from the Latin word for copper. Cyprus was the indispensable fuel tank for Aegean civilization, but copper alone was useless. The tin needed to alloy it into bronze had to come from even farther afield, likely from sources as distant as Cornwall, Anatolia, or even Central Asia, arriving through a chain of intermediaries. The Minoan palaces became the central nodes where these two streams converged. They controlled the storage, weighing, and redistribution of metal, feeding it to workshops that produced everything from exquisite ritual vessels to the practical tools that sustained their society. A single, extraordinary discovery brings this entire system to life in stunning detail. Just off the rugged coast of southern Turkey lies the wreck of the Uluburun ship, a vessel that sank around 1300 years before the Common Era. This is not merely a shipwreck, it is a frozen moment in Bronze Age global trade. Its cargo was a catalogue of the interconnected ancient world. The primary load was 10 tons of Cypriot copper ingots stacked neatly in rows. Alongside them were ingots of tin, blue glass from Mesopotamia, ebony logs from Africa, amber from the Baltic, and pottery from Cyprus and Canaan. Here, on one modest wooden ship, we have raw materials from 3 continents. This was the physical manifestation of the network: the copper from Cyprus, the tin from an unknown distant mine, the luxury goods from great empires, all traveling together to feed the demands of the Aegean palatial economies. The Uluburun was a floating supply line, and its loss was an economic catastrophe for someone. When the Mycenaeans rose to dominance, they adopted and militarized this Minoan template. Their society, immortalized in later epic poetry, was organized around the figure of the Wanax, a powerful king whose authority rested on control of bronze. In the fortified citadels of Mycenae, Pylos, and Turins, the Wanax sat at the center of a redistributive economy. Incoming copper and tin were stored in palace treasuries, meticulously recorded by scribes using the Linear B script. From these stores, bronze was allocated to armorers to make weapons for the warrior elite, to artisans for tools and ornaments, and to traders for further exchange. Controlling the trade routes was not a matter of mere profit, it was the foundation of political and military power. A Wanax who could not secure tin could not arm his followers, and his rule would swiftly end. This made the late Bronze Age Mediterranean a volatile arena of competition, where diplomacy, piracy, and maritime exploration were all tools in the relentless pursuit of metal security. The glittering world of Mycenaean gold masks and towering citadels was, at its core, a system built on the perpetual, anxious acquisition of 2 unassuming oars, transported across the open sea by sailors navigating by the stars. Their entire civilization was a testament to the fact that in an interconnected world, prosperity could flourish far from the original source, sustained only by the strength of the links in the chain. By the middle of the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, this scattered network of metal routes had matured into something astonishing. It was a world system, a term historians use to describe a vast, interdependent zone of exchange where no single empire held ultimate control, yet every major society was linked. Picture a spider's web glistening with dew at dawn, each strand connecting to several others, the entire structure trembling when one thread is touched. That was the Bronze Age world by 1500 BCE. From the amber forests of Scandinavia to the gold mines of Nubia, from the tin streams of Britain to the bustling ports of the Indus, people were participating in a shared economic reality. They might never meet, but the choices of a miner in Anatolia could influence the price of tin in Mesopotamia, and a shipwreck off the coast of Turkey could trigger a shortage of tools in Greece. This was the first true globalization, and it ran on metal. The system's genius was its lack of a central command. No pharaoh or emperor dictated its terms. Instead, it functioned through a resilient, overlapping chain of regional networks, each with its own specialists. A pastoralist on the Eurasian steppe might trade a lump of raw copper to an Oxus merchant. That merchant would transport it to a city where it was alloyed with tin from another source and crafted into axes. Those axes might then travel with a caravan to Assyria, be purchased by a Phoenician sea captain, and finally be sold in Egypt, where they could be melted down and recast into ceremonial objects for a temple. At every handoff, value was added and information was exchanged. The metal itself was the primary cargo, but it was never alone. It traveled with a package of other high-value goods. A ship carrying copper ingots would also hold amphorae of olive oil, bundles of dyed textiles, blocks of fragrant resin, and tusks of ivory. These were the luxury items that graced the palaces of kings and the temples of gods. But the most transformative cargo was intangible. Along these same routes moved the blueprints for civilization itself. The concept of standardized weights and measures, essential for fair trade, spread from the Indus to Mesopotamia. The idea of linear writing systems traveled from the Levant to the Aegean, evolving into the scripts that recorded palace inventories, styles of chariot warfare, architectural techniques for fortification, and even artistic motifs depicting deities or mythical creatures, all hitched a ride on the same roads and sea lanes that carried the bronze. A decorative pattern on a dagger made in Mycenae might find its echo on a ceramic pot in Cyprus, not through conquest, but through the quiet influence of traded goods. This created a profound and fragile interdependence. The great powers of the age, the Hittites, the Egyptians, the Mycenaeans, the Babylonians, were not isolated monoliths. They were nodes in the network, deeply reliant on the steady flow of resources from beyond their borders. A pharaoh's military might depend on Levantine tin and Aegean mercenaries. A Hittite king's legitimacy rested on controlling the Anatolian copper routes. Their prosperity was mutual, but so was their vulnerability. The entire edifice of this glittering Bronze Age world was built upon a foundation of constant, peaceful exchange. The metallurgy hubs were more than just factories. They were the indispensable engines of this interconnectedness. By creating a universal demand for specific, scarce materials, they forced cooperation over vast distances. They made the world smaller, not through force of arms, but through the simple, irresistible logic of supply and demand. The fate of empires now hinged on the skills of a smelter in a distant highland valley and the safe passage of a merchant ship through stormy seas. This was a magnificent achievement, a quiet testament to human ingenuity and connection, but it also set the stage for one of history's most dramatic and mysterious collapses. But this sprawling network was not run by faceless forces. It was powered by people, each with a distinct role in a new and emerging social order. The quiet revolution of metal created its own human hierarchy, one that would lay the groundwork for the very structure of civilization. At the foundation of every hub were the miners and smelters. Their world was one of physical hardship and profound, guarded knowledge. Miners descended into narrow, unstable tunnels with only flickering lamps for light, facing the constant threat of collapse. Above ground, the smelters presided over roaring furnaces, their faces lit by the otherworldly glow of molten metal. They were not simple laborers but master chemists of their age. Their skill lay in reading the fire, knowing the exact moment to add a fluxing agent, understanding how to draw the pure copper from the stubborn rock. This was a craft learned over a lifetime, often passed from parent to child. Their knowledge was a form of power, a secret that made them indispensable. Yet their social standing rarely matched their importance. They lived in the smoke and the dust, their work essential but grueling, creating the wealth that would flow to others. Moving this wealth required a different kind of specialist, the trader. These individuals were the connective tissue of the ancient world. A successful trader needed the endurance of a caravan driver, the sharp eye of an appraiser, and the diplomatic grace of an ambassador. They had to understand value across cultures, knowing that a pound of tin might be worth a certain weight of silver in Mesopotamia, but a bundle of fine wool in Anatolia. They navigated not just physical geography, but a complex human landscape of different languages, customs, and local rulers demanding tolls or favors. Their risk was immense. A single bandit attack, a shipwreck, or a shift in political winds could erase a lifetime's profit. But their reward was the privilege of being the link, of carrying news, ideas, and innovations along with their cargo. They were the original global citizens operating in the spaces between empires, and it was the elites of those empires who watched this flow of metal with the most intense interest. Kings, high priests, and powerful chieftains understood that control over bronze was control over society itself. In practical terms, it meant weapons. The ruler who could reliably arm his warriors with bronze spearheads and swords held a decisive military advantage, but metal's power was also symbolic. Elaborate bronze cauldrons, golden ceremonial axes, and intricate silver jewelry were not just displays of wealth, they were instruments of authority. They were used in rituals that reinforced the social order, gifted to loyal followers to secure their allegiance, and buried with leaders to signify their eternal status. To secure this dual power, elites did something revolutionary. They systematized control. They established the first forms of taxation, taking a share of metal production or trade goods. They created early bureaucracies to keep records of incoming ingots and outgoing allocations, leading to the development of writing systems like cuneiform and linear B. They organized labor on a massive scale, managing the hundreds of workers needed to run a mine, fuel its furnaces, and guard its products. In doing so, they were inventing the very idea of the state. The political structures that would define the ancient world, palaces, temples, centralized treasuries, were not born from abstract philosophy. They were forged quite literally in the need to manage the production and distribution of metal. The social fabric of the forge, from the soot-covered smelter to the tablet-writing scribe to the scepter-holding king, became the blueprint for how complex societies would organize themselves for millennia to come. The knowledge of the forge was a silent currency, more valuable than the metal it produced. This expertise did not travel in scrolls or carved tablets, for the language of the furnace was one of flame, gesture, and muscle memory. It moved with the people who held it. A master smelter, perhaps seeking new opportunity or fleeing conflict, might bring his family's guarded recipes to a new land. Intermarriage between communities could weave metallurgical lineages together, merging techniques. In less peaceful exchanges, the capture of skilled smiths was a prized spoil of war, a direct transfer of industrial capacity from one kingdom to another. The technology was inseparable from the technologist. This human migration meant that the blueprints for civilization spread not as abstract ideas, but as lived, hands-on practice. The design of a simple pit furnace, the precise mix of charcoal and ore, the telltale color of slag that signaled a successful smelt, these were details learned by watching, by doing, by making mistakes and corrections under a mentor's watchful eye. They diffused along the very same dusty caravan trails and coastal shipping lanes that carried the ingots themselves, creating a parallel stream of innovation flowing beneath the commerce. A powerful example of this silent dialogue is the lost wax method, known by its French term cire perdue. This sophisticated technique involves sculpting a model in wax, encasing it in clay to create a mold, then melting the wax out and pouring molten metal into the cavity. The result is a single, intricate casting impossible to achieve with simple molds. This brilliant process appears in the archaeological record of ancient Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, China, and later in West Africa and the Americas. Its independent invention in every region is highly unlikely. Instead, its presence speaks of knowledge shared and adapted along vast intercultural highways. A traveling artisan from the Levant might demonstrate the principle in an Anatolian workshop. A Mycenaean craftsman could learn a refinement from a Cypriot counterpart. Each culture then made the technique its own, using it to cast everything from delicate jewelry to monumental sculptures. This was the true technological package of the Bronze Age. It wasn't just about acquiring copper and tin. It was about learning how to combine them into a superior alloy, how to build a furnace hot enough to melt it, and how to shape that liquid potential into objects of power and beauty. This shared, growing body of know-how enabled disparate cultures from Britain to the Indus to participate in the same technological revolution. They were all speaking the same silent language of heat and chemistry, a language that fueled not just trade, but a continuous, collaborative leap forward in human capability. The sheer weight of the trade was its own staggering obstacle. We are not talking about a few precious gems tucked into a pouch, but mountains of raw ore and heavy, standardized ingots. Transporting tons of this dense material across continents without paved roads or engines stands as one of humanity's quietest engineering triumphs. Every successful journey was a logistical ballet, a carefully coordinated sequence of different transport methods, each chosen for a specific leg of the route. Over the rugged highlands of Anatolia or the passes of the Taurus Mountains, the work fell to trains of sure-footed donkeys, their backs laden with sacks of ore or bundles of ingots. In flatter terrain, wooden carts pulled by oxen could move larger loads, but only along established tracks that became the first commercial highways. Where geography allowed, rivers became liquid superhighways. A copper ingot mined in the mountains could be loaded onto a simple reed raft or a larger wooden barge and floated down the Euphrates towards Mesopotamian cities, or shipped along the Indus from northern mines to the coastal workshops of Lothal. This riverine network dramatically reduced the effort and cost, turning natural waterways into the arteries of early globalization. But the true game changer, the innovation that shrank the ancient world, was the harnessing of the wind. The development of the sail transformed the Mediterranean and the Arabian Sea from formidable barriers into connective highways. A single sturdy ship, like the ill-fated Uluburun vessel, could carry the equivalent of hundreds of donkey loads. It could travel day and night, moving 10 tons of Cypriot copper from its source to a Mycenaean palace in a fraction of the time an overland caravan would require. Maritime trade turned metal from a regional commodity into a truly global one, linking the tin of Cornwall to the workshops of the Levant in a journey of several weeks rather than many months. This complex mosaic of transport did not operate in a vacuum. It required an entire support system to function. Safe harbors had to be maintained where ships could dock, unload, and repair. Way stations sprang up along caravan routes, offering food, water, and shelter for drivers and animals. Most critically, the entire system relied on a fragile web of social agreements. Caravan leaders and ship captains needed to negotiate safe passage with the communities whose territories they crossed, paying tolls or offering gifts in exchange for protection from bandits or rival groups. These were the earliest forms of international diplomacy and trade law, pragmatic arrangements born from mutual need. A local chieftain controlling a mountain pass learned it was more profitable to charge a modest fee to every trader than to rob one and scare away all future commerce. The efficiency and reliability of these supply chains became the ultimate determinant of power. A metallurgy hub with poor transport links, no matter how rich its ore, would fade into obscurity. Its metal would be too expensive and too unreliable to reach distant markets. Conversely, a hub with access to a navigable river or a deep water port could thrive because it could promise regular, predictable shipments. For a king in Mesopotamia or a Wanax in Mycenae, planning a military campaign or a major construction project, this reliability was everything. His entire strategy depended on the assurance that the next shipment of tin would arrive on time. The silent, relentless movement of these heavy loads across land and sea did more than deliver metal. It built the very framework of trust and routine upon which the first global economy depended. This single island held a monopoly on a continent's ambition. In the ancient Mediterranean, the name for copper became inseparable from its primary source. The Latin phrase Cyprium, meaning metal of Cyprus, would eventually shorten to cuprum and from there to our modern word copper. This was not just a linguistic footnote. It was a declaration of total dominance. For over 1,000 years, from around 2,500 years before the Common Era, Cyprus was not merely a source of copper, it was the source. Its geology made it so. The island's rugged Taurus Mountains were threaded with rich veins of copper ore, close enough to the surface to be mined with the technology of the time, and positioned perfectly in the eastern Mediterranean, a natural stepping stone between the Aegean, Anatolia, and the Levant. This fortunate geography turned Cyprus into the indispensable fuel depot for the entire Bronze Age system. The scale of its industry was staggering. At the massive mine of Skouryatissa, one of the oldest in the world, miners carved deep terraces into the hillsides following the green ore. The landscape was transformed into a vast, smoky industrial zone. Forests were cleared to feed the furnaces, and the air itself must have carried the sharp, metallic scent of constant smelting. The product of this relentless labor took a form so distinctive it became an international brand, the oxhide ingot. These were not rough lumps of metal. They were carefully cast into a standardized shape resembling a stretched animal hide, with 4 handles protruding from the corners. This ingenious design was pure logistics. The handles allowed 2 men to easily carry the heavy ingot on a pole, and the flat, symmetrical shape meant they could be stacked neatly and securely in the hull of a ship, like Bronze Age shipping containers. The ubiquity of these ingots tells the story of Cypriot copper's reach. They have been pulled from the sea in shipwrecks off the Turkish coast, discovered in the storerooms of Mycenaean palaces, and found as far west as Sardinia and as far north as the shores of the Black Sea. Wherever you find an oxhide ingot, you are looking at a piece of Cyprus, a tangible piece of the network. This made the island a prize of unimaginable value and a perpetual target. Control of Cyprus meant control over the primary ingredient for Bronze Age power. The records of the great empires are filled with references to it. The Hittite kings of Anatolia claimed overlordship. The pharaohs of Egypt, just a short sail to the south, eyed it covetously. The Mycenaean Greek palaces, utterly dependent on imported copper, worked tirelessly to secure trading agreements or even establish footholds there. Cyprus was the chessboard on which empires played for the highest stakes. This intense focus reshaped the island's entire society. It became hyper-specialized, a one-resource economy millennia before the term existed. While some farming continued, the island's wealth, its identity, and its political fate became inextricably linked to the green metal from its mountains. Local Cypriot cities grew wealthy as production and export hubs, but this also created a profound vulnerability. The island's prosperity was not built on self-sufficiency, but on a fragile external demand. Its fortunes rose and fell not with its own harvests, but with the political stability and military needs of distant kings. If war disrupted trade routes, the ingots piled up unsold. If a new source of copper was discovered elsewhere, the island's relevance could dwindle overnight. Cyprus was the ultimate node, powerful yet precarious, a testament to how a single, critical resource could elevate a place to global importance while chaining its destiny to the turbulent currents of an interconnected world. The most powerful players in this ancient economy were not always the loudest. While the great empires produced and consumed on a massive scale, the entire system depended on a different kind of specialist, the cultures of the middle ground. These were the societies that thrived not by controlling the source or the final market, but by mastering the space in between. They inhabited the corridors, the ports, and the crossroads, turning geography into opportunity. Their power came from connection itself. Consider the vast, windswept expanse of the Eurasian steppe, to the settled civilizations of Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. This was often seen as a wild, peripheral space, home to nomadic pastoralists. These communities may not have dug deep mines or built smelting hubs on the scale of Cyprus, but they controlled something far more strategic: the land itself. The east-west corridors of the steppe, the natural highways following rivers and valleys, were the only feasible routes for moving Central Asian tin and other goods toward the west. A nomadic confederation controlling a key mountain pass or a river ford held immense, quiet leverage. They could guarantee safe passage for a caravan for a price, or they could halt the flow entirely. Their role was not passive. They did not merely wave caravans through. They provided the essential services of the ancient logistics chain: guides who knew the terrain, protection from other groups, fresh horses and pack animals, and secure stopping points. In exchange, they took a share of the goods, absorbing not just material wealth but the cultural currents that traveled with it. A steppe chieftain might wear a dagger crafted in Bactria, carry a mirror made in China, and be buried with a ceremonial cup from the Oxus civilization. His society became a living museum of Eurasian exchange, a unique hybrid forged on the move. Far to the south, a very different kind of middle ground emerged along the sun-drenched coast of the Levant, in cities like Ugarit and Byblos. Here, the sea was the corridor. These city-states became the world's first free ports, neutral hubs where Egyptian, Anatolian, Cypriot, and Mesopotamian interests could converge. A merchant from Mycenae could dock his ship, sell his cargo of olive oil and pottery, and use the profits to purchase tin that had arrived overland from the east, all within the same bustling, polyglot waterfront. The Levantine ports were masterful facilitators. They developed sophisticated commercial laws to settle disputes between foreigners, standardized systems of weights and measures that everyone could trust, and warehouses for storage and transshipment. They added value through reprocessing, perhaps refining raw copper ingots into more convenient sizes or crafting generic metal into culturally specific ornaments before sending it on its final journey. But their most profound impact was as a cultural filter. A Mesopotamian myth entering the port of Ugarit might be written down on a clay tablet using a local alphabetic script, a technology simpler than cuneiform. That script, born from the needs of international commerce, could then travel with Phoenician sailors to the Aegean, influencing the development of Greek writing. A religious symbol from Egypt might blend with a Hittite deity in a Levantine workshop, creating a new icon that was then exported back to both regions. These intermediaries were the translators of the ancient world. They took the raw materials and ideas flowing through their hands and reinterpreted them, creating vibrant, hybrid cultures that were entirely their own. They proved that in a network, influence does not flow only from the powerful to the weak. It pulses back and forth through the connectors, and those who control the points of exchange can shape the destiny of civilizations, all without ever swinging a bronze sword in conquest. The green fire of the furnace did more than transform ore, it transformed human society itself. The intricate dance of securing tin, smelting copper, and shipping ingots could never be managed by a village elder acting alone. It demanded a new kind of organization, one built on command, specialization, and a clear chain of responsibility. The very logic of metal production became a blueprint for building states. To launch a mining expedition into distant, rugged hills required a leader who could muster and supply a workforce, often for months at a time. To protect a caravan of tin ingots crossing hundreds of miles demanded guards loyal to a central authority, not just to their local clan. And to manage the master smelters, whose secret knowledge was the heart of the operation, required a system that could reward their loyalty while ensuring their priceless output flowed to the right places. This was the birth of administration. Elites, whether chieftains or early kings, found themselves inventing the tools of governance out of sheer necessity. They developed the first ration systems, allocating food and supplies from central stores to miners and craftsmen who were no longer farming for themselves. They created tokens and later written records to track contributions and distributions, giving rise to early bureaucracies. The clay tablets of palaces like those at Ebla or Pylos are filled with such lists. So many measures of barley to the coppersmiths, so many ingots received from the coastal trader. This was not bookkeeping for its own sake. It was the nervous system of a metal-powered society. The immense wealth this system generated then flowed back, amplifying these new structures exponentially. Surplus from metal trade did not simply spread evenly. It concentrated in the hands of those controlling the networks, funding a profound change in the human landscape. This concentrated capital built the first monumental architecture not as communal projects, but as statements of power and divine favor. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the fortified citadels of Mycenae. It paid for larger, professional armies equipped with standardized bronze weapons, armies that could protect trade routes or conquer rival sources. And it necessitated even more scribes, tax collectors, and overseers to manage the growing complexity, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of administrative growth. In this way, the quest for metal acted as a powerful accelerant for social change. It helped catalyze the shift from relatively egalitarian, village-based chiefdoms to stratified, urban-centered kingdoms. It embedded new forms of inequality, separating the elite who controlled the metal from the laborers who dug it and the smiths who forged it. Yet, paradoxically, it also fostered cooperation on a scale previously unimaginable. A king in Mesopotamia and a tribal leader in the Taurus Mountains might never meet, but they learned to cooperate through treaties and exchanged gifts to keep the copper flowing. The system demanded both hierarchy and partnership, creating a world where your distant trading partner's stability was as crucial as your own army's strength. The social order forged in these ancient workshops was complex, often unequal, but undeniably interconnected, setting a pattern that would define civilizations for millennia to come. But how could a king in a distant palace truly know the wealth flowing through his realm? The answer was etched not in stone but in clay. As metal became the lifeblood of these early states, it created a new, urgent problem: memory. A human mind could remember the faces of a dozen traders or the details of a local harvest, but it could not hold the vast, impersonal data of a continental economy. How many tons of copper arrived from Cyprus last season? What was owed to the master smelter for his latest batch of bronze tools? Which village had received its allocation of tin for the coming year? The sheer scale and complexity of the metal trade demanded a system beyond spoken words and trusting handshakes. It demanded a permanent record, one that could be checked, stored, and passed to successors. This practical need, born in the storerooms and docksides of the ancient world, gave humanity one of its most profound gifts: writing. The very first script we know of, Mesopotamian cuneiform, began not as poetry or history but as accounting. Its earliest symbols, pressed into soft clay tablets with a reed stylus, are inventories. They list numbers of sheep, jars of oil, and most tellingly, quantities of metal. We see tablets meticulously recording the receipt of so many copper ingots from a merchant named Erdumuzi, or the disbursement of a specific weight of tin to the workshop of the smith Lunana. Each mark was a claim, a verification, a piece of a vast and growing ledger that tracked the most valuable commodity of the age. writing transformed metal from a physical object into an abstract, controllable asset. A king no longer had to physically see his copper to command it. He could hold a tablet that stated its existence and its location. This was a revolution in power. It allowed for planning on a grand scale, for multi-year projects and military campaigns budgeted in advance with expected metal revenues. It created the possibility of credit and debt, as promises of future metal deliveries could be recorded and enforced. A trader could carry a sealed tablet as a bill of lading, a contract that proved what he was shipping and to whom. Writing built a skeleton of trust across the network, allowing strangers who shared no language to engage in complex transactions, all mediated by a system of marks that everyone in power agreed to honor. This pattern repeated wherever metal drove complex economies. Centuries later and a world away, in the Mycenaean Greek palaces, a different script told the same essential story. The Linear B tablets, baked hard in the fires that destroyed those palaces, are overwhelmingly administrative. They are the filing cabinets of the Wanaks. One tablet from the palace at Pylos might record that the smith so received an allocation of bronze to make spearheads. Another might list the chariot wheels fitted with bronze tires in the palace armory. These were not casual notes. They were the central nervous system of a state whose power was literally forged from imported metal. The scribe, with his stylus and damp clay, was as crucial to the kingdom's defense as the warrior with his bronze sword. He ensured that the precious material was not wasted, lost, or stolen, that it flowed precisely where the palace required. In this light, writing was the ultimate management tool for an impersonal economy. When trade was local and based on known relationships, a person's word might be enough. But when your copper came from a mine you had never seen, was shipped by a captain you might never meet again, and was stored for a king who ruled over thousands, personal trust was insufficient. The system required an objective, durable memory. It required writing, so the next time you see an ancient cuneiform tablet or a fragment of Linear B, look beyond the strange symbols. See it for what it truly was, the receipt for a shipment of tin, the payroll for a smith, the inventory of an empire's military strength. Our earliest stories were not written in ink or on parchment, but pressed into clay by accountants tracking the quiet, world-changing flow of metal. The sheer scale of this ancient industry left a permanent signature on the earth itself. For every gleaming ingot that entered the trade network, a hidden cost was paid in transformed landscapes. The green hills surrounding a major smelting hub did not stay green for long. To sustain the constant, roaring heat of a furnace required fuel on an almost unimaginable scale. Smelting just a few kilograms of copper ore could consume an entire mature tree, turned into charcoal. Multiply that by centuries of continuous production at a place like Cyprus or in the Taurus Mountains, and you begin to see the scale of the demand. Managed woodlands were harvested in a cycle, but as hubs grew, the demand often outstripped nature's ability to replenish. The result was progressive deforestation, a creeping barrenness radiating out from the industrial heart. This was the first industrial footprint, a quiet alteration of the environment driven by human ambition. The impact extended far beyond the loss of trees. Mining operations scarred the earth with open pits and tunnels, while the process of separating metal from rock produced mountains of waste. This byproduct, known as slag, was often simply piled in great heaps near the furnaces. These slag heaps, composed of stony material and traces of heavy metals, could leach into local soil and water sources, subtly poisoning the land for generations. In parts of Cornwall in Britain and on the slopes of Cyprus's Troodos Mountains, these ancient, grass-covered mounds are still visible today, silent monuments to the immense volume of rock that was processed to extract a fraction of usable metal. For the communities running these hubs, this created a pressing logistical crisis. a thriving metallurgy center could literally fuel its own demise. As local forests receded, the cost and effort of gathering wood skyrocketed. Transporting fuel from ever greater distances became a major drain on the operation's efficiency. This forced difficult choices. Some hubs might begin to import timber or charcoal along the same trade routes they used for exporting metal, a costly but necessary solution. In more extreme cases, the entire smelting operation might have to relocate, following the receding tree line and leaving behind a landscape of abandoned pits and barren slopes. This early cycle of resource extraction, local depletion, and adaptation is a profound echo of challenges we still face today. It shows that the people of the Bronze Age were not just passive inhabitants of their environment. They were active and sometimes overwhelming agents of change. Their need for metal drove them to reshape the world around them with a force previously reserved for natural disasters. The enduring scars they left are a testament to the staggering scale of their enterprise, and a sobering reminder that every leap in human technology, even one as foundational as metal, comes with an enduring mark upon the planet. The roaring furnace was more than a tool, it was a temple. To the people of the ancient world, the act of smelting bordered on magic. They watched as ordinary stone placed into a fiery pit did not simply burn. It wept, then flowed, transforming into a shimmering, liquid sun captured in a clay crucible. This was not a process they fully understood in a scientific sense, so they framed it within the only context powerful enough to contain it, the sacred. The smelter was not merely a craftsman, he was a priest presiding over a profound metamorphosis, an alchemist turning earth into power. This spiritual dimension wrapped the entire craft in a cloak of ritual and secrecy. Before a critical smelt, a master might make offerings to the spirits of the mountain from which the ore was taken, or to the god of fire. The furnace itself could be consecrated, its construction accompanied by chants or the placement of special stones. These practices were not superstition in the way we might dismiss the term today. They were a framework for managing immense risk and focusing intense skill. In a world where a single failed firing meant weeks of wasted labor, ritual created a sense of control, a way to align human effort with cosmic forces. This sacred aura naturally attached itself to the gods. Across cultures, we find deities who are master smiths. In Mesopotamia, it was Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and craft, who knew the secret recipes of the earth. For the Greeks, it was Hephaestus, the limping artificer who forged the weapons of the gods and automatons of gold in his volcanic workshop. In West African traditions, the god Ogun presides over iron, war, and technology. These were not minor figures. They were central, powerful gods because the technology they represented was central and powerful. The smith on earth was seen as an agent of such a deity, channeling divine power through his hammer and fire. This gave the smith an incredibly ambiguous social position. He was indispensable, revered for his almost supernatural skill. A village or a king relied on him completely for tools, weapons, and symbols of authority. Yet that very power could make him an object of fear. He worked with elements earth, fire, mysterious stones that ordinary people did not fully control. He often lived somewhat apart, his workshop on the edge of the settlement due to the risk of fire and the noxious smoke. This separation, combined with his guarded knowledge, could cast him as an outsider, a figure of both deep respect and quiet suspicion. His craft was a closed mystery, a guild secret protected as much by religious taboo as by practical need. To share the secrets of the furnace with the uninitiated was not just bad business, it could be seen as a sacrilege. This intertwining of the technical and the spiritual elevated the objects they made. A bronze spearhead was not just a weapon, it was a manifestation of divine power granted to a warrior. A ceremonial axe never meant for battle was a symbol of authority that connected a chieftain to the gods of the forge. This is why the finest metal objects are so often found in burial contexts. Placing a bronze mirror in a grave or a golden cup beside the departed was not merely a display of wealth. It was an act of spiritual provision. These objects, born from the sacred flame, were believed to carry their potent magic into the afterlife, offering protection, status, and a continued connection to the divine. The metal itself was thought to hold a kind of life force bestowed by the transformative fire. So the next time you see an ancient bronze artifact in a museum case, look beyond its shape. See it for what it truly was to the people who made it: a frozen fragment of ritual fire, a piece of solidified magic, and a silent witness to the time when the boundary between workshop and temple was as thin as the edge of a well-forged blade. That sacred, liquid sun in the crucible would soon cool and shatter. The intricate web that had sustained the Bronze Age world for centuries began to unravel with terrifying speed. Around 1200 years before the Common Era, a cascade of failures swept across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. The grand palaces of the Mycenaean Greeks were burned and abandoned. The mighty Hittite Empire in Anatolia vanished from history. The great trading city of Ugarit on the Levantine coast sent desperate, final letters to its allies, pleading for help that never came before it was utterly destroyed. This period, known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, was not the fall of a single kingdom. It was the catastrophic failure of an entire system, and at the heart of that failure was the severing of the very networks that had built the age. The long, delicate supply chains for tin and copper, stretching from Cornwall to Afghanistan, snapped. The ghost trade routes fell silent. The ships that carried oxhide ingots stopped sailing. This was not a single event with a simple cause, but a perfect storm of pressures that overwhelmed the network's resilience. Evidence points to a period of prolonged drought and crop failures, likely linked to a shifting climate, which put immense strain on populations and sparked mass movements of people. These movements, often recorded in Egyptian texts as attacks by mysterious sea peoples, overwhelmed the established order. As conflict flared, the first casualty was trust. The safe passage agreements that allowed caravans to cross territories and ships to dock at neutral ports dissolved into suspicion and violence. A merchant could no longer be sure his tin would reach its destination, or that he would return with the copper he needed. The cost of trade, both in financial risk and in physical danger, became impossibly high. One by one, the links in the chain broke. A tin mine in Central Asia might still be producing, but with the overland routes through Anatolia in chaos, its product had nowhere to go. A Cypriot copper smelter might still light his furnace, but with no Mycenaean palace to ship to, his ingots piled up uselessly. The system relied on every node functioning, and when several key points failed simultaneously, the entire network collapsed in on itself. The consequences were immediate and devastating for the palatial states. Their power was not self-contained, it was imported. Without a reliable flow of bronze, kings could not arm new generations of soldiers. The elite's authority, symbolized by bronze weaponry and ritual objects, lost its material foundation. The complex bureaucracies that managed the metal trade, the scribes with their clay tablets, became obsolete overnight. Literacy itself, which had grown to serve the needs of this economy, retreated or vanished in many regions. The world did not end, but it contracted dramatically, reverting to smaller, more localized and self-sufficient communities. The great globalization experiment of the Bronze Age had reached its limits, revealing a profound and unsettling truth. The very interconnectedness that had created such wealth and cultural flowering also created a devastating vulnerability. The collapse demonstrated that these early global systems were not monolithic empires but fragile ecosystems. Their health depended entirely on the quiet, continuous operation of distant mines, the safe journeys of anonymous traders, and a stable climate that allowed farmers to feed the specialized workers of the hubs. When those conditions frayed, the entire magnificent structure came down, leaving behind a puzzle of ruined palaces and silent shipwrecks for future archaeologists to decipher. The collapse left a world in fragments, but the embers of innovation still glowed. In the scattered communities that survived, a metal long overlooked began to claim its destiny. Iron, once a curious novelty, was about to rewrite the rules of power entirely. The key difference was not in its strength, which was initially inferior to well-crafted bronze, but in its availability. While copper and tin were rare treasures locked in specific, distant mountains, iron ore was practically everywhere. It was the rust-colored soil in a riverbank, the heavy black sand on a beach, the common rock in 100 hillsides. This simple geological fact shattered the old economic model. You no longer needed to control a trade route stretching 1,000 miles to secure your metal supply. A village with a skilled smith and a local deposit of bog iron could produce its own tools and weapons. This was the great democratization of metal. It broke the monopoly held by the palatial hubs and their fragile, long-distance networks. Suddenly, new powers could rise from the ashes without asking permission from a distant king or waiting for a ship that might never arrive. We see this new reality etched into the stories of the Eastern Mediterranean. Groups like the Philistines settling along the coast and the emerging Israelite tribes in the highlands built their societies on this accessible technology. They forged iron plowshares to farm difficult land and iron swords to defend it, their power growing from local resources and local skill. The most dramatic example of this shift was the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Its terrifying military machine, which would come to dominate the Near East, ran on iron. Assyrian armies were equipped with iron weapons on a scale previously unimaginable. Their success built on securing regional ore sources and mobilizing captive smiths, not on importing ingots from across the sea. This new age fostered a more localized, self-sufficient production model, at least at first, but human ingenuity and the desire for superiority soon began weaving a new web. While anyone could make iron, making exceptional iron was another matter. The highest quality steel, a material of legendary sharpness and resilience, required advanced techniques and specific resources. And so, new patterns of trade emerged, chasing a different kind of excellence. Centuries later, in South India, smiths mastered the production of a revolutionary material known as Wootz steel. By carefully controlling the carbon content within crucibles, they created ingots of patterned steel that could be forged into blades of unparalleled sharpness and flexibility. This was not a common commodity, it was a premium product, a technological marvel, and like the tin of old, it began to travel. Wootz steel ingots would eventually find their way across the Indian Ocean to the Middle East and beyond, where they were reforged into the famed Damascus swords of later centuries. The trade networks had not vanished, they had evolved. The age of quiet bronze hubs with their secretive guilds and centralized control had passed. In its place rose an Iron Age, still deeply interconnected, but built on a different foundation. Power was now forged in 1,000 local fires, yet still drawn together by the endless human pursuit of a better edge, a stronger tool, a more perfect material. So the story of these hubs does not come from written chronicles or royal decrees. It is a tale told by the earth itself, patiently decoded by modern archaeological detectives. Their evidence is not parchment but patina, not ink but isotope. To understand the silent language of these ancient networks, scientists have developed a form of forensic chemistry. Every lump of copper ore from a specific mountain range carries a unique chemical signature, a hidden fingerprint formed millions of years ago by the geology of that precise location. Using a technique called lead isotope analysis, researchers can take a tiny sample from a bronze artifact found in a Mesopotamian tomb or a Mycenaean palace and match its isotopic ratio to databases of known ore sources. It is like running a background check on a piece of metal. The results can be stunningly precise, revealing that a dagger buried with a pharaoh was forged from copper mined in the Taurus Mountains of Anatolia, or that an axe head from Scandinavia contains tin that once lay in the streams of Cornwall. This invisible signature is the ultimate proof of travel, a silent witness to journeys of thousands of miles. The landscape around these hubs confesses its industrial past to anyone who knows how to look. The most obvious clues are the vast, grass-covered mounds of slag, the stony waste left over from smelting. These are not natural hills. Their size alone speaks volumes, a direct measure of the staggering volume of ore that was processed over centuries. A large slag heap is a monument to relentless production, to fires that burned for generations. Nearby, archaeologists often find the faint, circular impressions of furnace bases in the soil, or the crumbling remains of clay tires, the pipes that once channeled air into the fire to raise its temperature. By carefully excavating these features, scientists can reconstruct the entire smelting process, understanding the technology, and even estimating the output of a site. They can see how the design of furnaces evolved over time, becoming more efficient as knowledge spread. Perhaps the most evocative time capsules are not on land, but beneath the sea. A shipwreck like the Uluburun is a moment frozen in tragedy, yet it offers an unparalleled snapshot of the network in motion. When archaeologists meticulously map and recover its cargo, they are not just listing objects, they are reconstructing a manifest. The 10 tons of Cypriot copper ingots stacked neatly in the hull tell us about bulk commodity transport. The tin ingots beside them reveal the two critical ingredients traveling together. The presence of Canaanite jars, Mycenaean pottery, Egyptian scarabs, and Baltic amber in the same hold paints a vivid picture of a connected Mediterranean economy, where a single merchant vessel acted as a mobile hub, collecting and distributing goods along a circuit. Each artifact is a data point, and together they graph the routes of ancient commerce. On a broader scale, settlement patterns tell a social story. Archaeologists mapping a region will often find that villages and towns cluster not around the most fertile farmland, but around outcrops of copper ore or along trails leading to tin sources. These communities were shaped by the resource. Their layout might show specialized zones with areas for ore processing, charcoal production, and metalworking distinct from domestic quarters. The very existence of a sizable town in a remote, mountainous area is often a clue that it was there for industry, not agriculture. By surveying these patterns, researchers can see how human geography was bent to the will of metal, how populations moved and concentrated in response to this new economic force. This painstaking detective work, combining chemistry, geology, underwater archaeology, and landscape survey, does more than fill museums. It weaves together a narrative of astonishing scope. It transforms a corroded lump of bronze into a character in a story that spans continents. It proves that a lonely slag heap in Cyprus was directly linked to a warrior's grave in Greece, and that a mine in Afghanistan indirectly influenced the price of goods in Babylon. These hubs were not isolated, grimy factories. They were pulsating hearts, drawing in raw materials and skilled people, and pumping out finished goods, ideas, and social change along veins of trade that reached across the known world. Through the quiet science of the trowel and the mass spectrometer, we can finally hear the faint, persistent heartbeat of the first global economy. This vast web of exchange forces us to reconsider a very familiar word. When we call this the first global trade system, what does global truly mean for a world without satellites or maps? Their globe was not our planet, but the known world, a realm stretching from the stormy Atlantic coasts to the winding rivers of the Indus Valley. This was a staggering sphere of interaction, larger than any single empire and unprecedented in the entire human story up to that point. Within this sphere, they built a form of globalization with features we would recognize today. It was a system defined by deep interdependence, where a drought in Anatolia could mean bread grew scarce in Egypt, not because Egypt was conquered, but because the ships carrying grain were needed elsewhere to feed miners. It thrived on cultural hybridization, as motifs from Mycenaean Greece appeared on pottery in Cyprus, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals inspired craftsmen in the distant Indus. And as the collapse revealed, it possessed a profound vulnerability to systemic shocks. A disruption in one corridor, whether from climate, conflict, or the failure of trust, could cascade through the entire network, toppling palaces that seemed invincible. The quiet, relentless trade in copper and tin was the backbone of this entire experiment. It proves a powerful idea. Globalization is not a modern invention born of steam engines and the internet. It is a recurring pattern in human history, an impulse that emerges whenever a resource becomes essential yet scarce. It is driven by that fundamental, unchanging need to acquire what we lack, and it is enabled by our species' remarkable capacity to build bridges across vast distances, to turn strangers into partners, and to weave complex, resilient networks out of nothing but mutual necessity and ingenuity. The story of these early hubs is therefore more than an archaeological curiosity. It is a deep echo. Their world of oxide ingots and ghost trade routes was the original prototype for our own interconnected age, a reminder that the forces shaping our globalized present have very ancient and very human roots. That ancient pattern of scarcity and connection never truly faded. It merely evolved, trading the green flame of the furnace for the cool glow of a clean room. The dynamics that powered Bronze Age hubs, concentrated resources, guarded expertise, and fragile, far-flung supply chains, are not relics. They are the blueprint of our modern world, recast in silicon and rare earth metals. Today's most critical commodity is not bronze, but the semiconductor, and just like tin, its essential components are locked in specific, scattered corners of the globe. The island of Taiwan does not sit atop copper veins, but it has become the Cyprus of the 21st century, producing an overwhelming share of the world's most advanced chips. Its factories are the new smelting hubs, where unimaginably complex knowledge transforms raw materials into the processed intelligence that powers everything from smartphones to advanced weapons systems. The master smelters have been replaced by teams of engineers, their recipes etched in light rather than memorized by fire, but their role is identical. They hold the guarded, irreplaceable knowledge that transforms common elements into concentrated power. And just as ancient kings anxiously tracked shipments from Anatolia, modern governments watch the security of the Taiwan Strait with profound strategic concern, because a disruption there would not simply raise prices, it would stall entire economies. The parallels extend to the raw materials themselves. Consider cobalt, a metal essential for the batteries in electric vehicles and countless devices. Over half of the world's supply comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is the tin of our era, a single, geographically concentrated source for a material critical to a global technological transition. The journey from a Congolese mine to a battery factory in Asia mirrors the ghost trade routes of old, a multi-stage chain involving local miners, international conglomerates, and complex logistics, where each handoff adds value and risk. The geopolitical tensions this creates are straight from the Bronze Age playbook. Nations and corporations engage in a quiet, relentless race to secure access, forge alliances with producing regions, and develop alternative sources or technologies, just as the Mycenaeans once sought new tin partners or the Hittites vied for control of Anatolian copper. Our vulnerability is the same, only magnified by speed and scale. A conflict in a key region, a pandemic disrupting ports, or a natural disaster damaging a single factory can now send shockwaves through the global system within weeks, revealing how our celebrated interconnectedness is also a profound point of weakness. The collapse of the late Bronze Age serves as a sobering case study in systemic risk. It reminds us that a network built on specialized production and long-distance logistics is only as strong as its most fragile link. When trust evaporates and routes are severed, the intricate flow stops, and the structures that depend on it can falter. Understanding the quiet hubs of 5,000 years ago does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It gives us a profound lens, a long-term perspective, to examine our own reality. It shows that globalization is not a one-time event, but a recurring condition humanity enters when we become dependent on things we cannot make ourselves. The anxieties of a pharaoh awaiting a tin shipment and a manufacturer awaiting a chip delivery are, at their core, the same. They speak to a timeless truth. Our greatest leaps forward have always been built on networks of mutual need, brilliant yet brittle threads connecting us across mountains, seas, and millennia. The map of the ancient world is still dotted with blank spaces, silent question marks where history's records fall quiet. For all we have uncovered about the Bronze Age network, some of its most critical hubs remain stubbornly phantoms. Take tin, the ghost metal. Classical Greek and Roman writers spoke of a distant, fog-shrouded place they called the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands. Many believe these were the Isles of Scilly off Cornwall or parts of the Cornish peninsula itself, places long known for their tin streams. Yet, definitive archaeological proof linking these specific locations to the high-volume trade of the second millennium before the Common Era remains elusive. Were the Cassiterides these very islands, or were they a broader, mythical name for all tin-producing lands at the edge of the known world? The answer is more than academic trivia. It is about pinpointing the exact origins of the material that made an age. Similarly, we know from chemical analysis that tin from Central Asian sources, likely in modern Afghanistan, reached the workshops of Mesopotamia. But tracing the precise, winding path it took is a detective story with a missing middle chapter. Did it travel south through the Indus Valley and then by ship up the Persian Gulf? Or was it carried west through the high passes of the Iranian plateau, handled by a succession of mountain tribes before reaching the great cities? Each possible route implies a different web of political relationships and cultural exchanges, a different story of how the ancient world stitched itself together. These are not just gaps in a trade ledger, they are missing links in the chain of human connection. The mysteries extend far beyond the Old World. In the Americas, sophisticated metallurgy developed independently, with cultures in the Andes working gold, copper, and silver into breathtaking objects millennia ago. But were there extensive pre-Columbian trade networks for these metals connecting South America, Mesoamerica, and North America? Finds of distant materials in ceremonial contexts suggest long-distance exchange, but the scale and regularity of these systems are still being uncovered. Was there a quiet, continental dialogue in metals happening parallel to the one across Eurasia, waiting for its own Uluburun shipwreck to be found? Perhaps the most intimate silence surrounds the people at the heart of it all. We can reconstruct their furnaces, weigh their slag heaps, and analyze their ingots, but the social lives of the smelters, the charcoal burners, the miners often vanish in the smoke. Did they form a privileged caste revered for their almost magical skill, or were they bound to their labor, essential yet marginalized, living in soot-stained settlements apart from the centers of power? Their individual hopes, their stories of apprenticeship, their daily rituals beyond the furnace floor are whispers lost to time. This invisibility makes every personal find a treasure. A single, worn-out sandal preserved in the mud of a mining camp, a humble cooking pot near a furnace, a marking on a tool that might be a maker's sign. These fragments are precious because they hint at the human experience behind the industrial scale. These enduring puzzles are not failures of archaeology, they are its very engine. They remind us that history is not a completed book, but a vast and intricate jigsaw puzzle where we may never find all the pieces. Each new discovery, a shipwreck preserved in deep mud, a mine shaft sealed by a long-ago collapse, or a cuneiform tablet listing a merchant's name and his cargo, acts like a sudden light. It can illuminate a dark corner of the map, confirm a long-held theory, or, most thrillingly, force us to redraw the connections entirely. The search for these answers continues, a quiet testament to our desire to hear the full story of those first world-weaving networks. That quiet revolution in a crucible was the first draft of our world. From the fire-lit forges of Anatolia to the port warehouses of Lothal, these early metallurgy hubs were the unsung architects of everything that followed. They were more than workshops, they were the original engines of connection, transforming raw earth into the very currency of civilization. By creating an urgent, universal demand for specific metals, they forced distant peoples to talk, to trade, and to trust. They wove a web of exchange that stretched from the Atlantic mists to the Indus River, a network so resilient it functioned for centuries without a central command. This web did more than move ingots, it carried the blueprints for society itself, catalyzing the rise of cities, the invention of writing, and the complex dance of diplomacy and statecraft. The story of bronze is fundamentally the story of our first attempt to build a global community. It is a profound testament to human ingenuity and our deep-seated interdependence, revealing that the forces of globalization have roots far older than steam or silicon. They are etched into the slag heaps of Cyprus and the shipwrecks of the Mediterranean. As we navigate our own era of intricate supply chains and resource diplomacy, remembering these quiet beginnings offers a crucial perspective. It reminds us that our interconnected world is not a sudden invention, but the latest chapter in a very long story of scarcity, innovation, and connection. The choices of a miner 5,000 years ago still echo in the pathways of our modern economy. If you found this journey into the foundations of trade fascinating, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden engines of history. Let us know in the comments which ancient trade mystery you would like us to explore next.